Excuse me. I hope everybody's okay. We're just going to look at an article by Christopher Price. Christopher Price on Bede's Library. Did Josephus refer to Jesus? A thorough review of the Testimonium Flavianum by Christopher Price. It's a very scholarly, in-depth article on Josephus mentioning of Jesus, and there's quite a bit of scholarship there. The article has a number of scholarly references. Paul Barnett, Jesus and the Rise of Early Christianity, Downers Grove, 1999, F.F. Bruce, The New Testament Documents, Downers Grove, 2000, Charles James, Research on the Historical Jesus Today, Jesus and the Pseudeographer, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Codices, Josephus, and Archaeology, Princeton Seminary Bulletin, Volume 5, Charlesworth, James H., Jesus Within Judaism, New York, 1988, Cohen, Shane J. D., Josephus in Galilee and Rome, Brill Publications, 1979, Earl Doughty, The Jesus Puzzle, Canadian Humanist Publications, 1990, Robert Eisler, The Messiah, Jesus and the John the Baptist, Alexander Haggerty, Crappe, TRNS, Methuen, 1931, Eusebius, The History of the Church, Andrew Louth, translation G.A. Williamson, Penguin, 1990, Feldman, Louise H., The Testimonium Flavianum, The State of the Question, quote, Christological Perspectives, editors Robert F. Berkeley and Sarah Edwards, New York, 1982. Louise H. Feldman, Josephus of Modern Scholarship, New York, 1984. Louise H. Feldman, Josephus, Anchor Bible Dictionary, Volume 3, Doubleday, 1992. Louise H. Feldman, Josephus, Interpretive Methods and Tendencies in Dictionary of New Testament Background, Dover's Grove, 2000. R.T. France, The Evidence of Jesus, Dover's Grove, 1982. Paula Fredrickson, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, Vintage, 2000. Robert Grant, The Apostolic Fathers, Volume 4, London, 1966. Luke J. Johnson, The Real Jesus, Harper, San Francisco, reprint, 1997. Jeffrey Lauder, Josh McDowell's Evidence for Jesus. Peter Kirby, The Testimonium Flavianum, The Early Christian Writings.com. Steve Mason, Josephus and the New Testament, Hendrickson Publications, 1992. John P. Meyer, A Marginal Jew, Volume 1, Anchor Bible, 2001. Roger Pierce, Josephus in the Ante-Nicene Fathers, all the citations at Tertullian.org. Price, Christopher, response to Ken Olson on the Testimonium Flavianum. E.P. Sanders, The Historical Figure of Jesus, New York, 1993. Graham Stanton, The Gospels and Jesus, Oxford University Press, 1989. Henry St. John Thackeray, Josephus, Volume 4, Loeb Classical Library, Cambridge, 1930. Verst van, Robert Verst van, Jesus Outside in the New Testament, William B. Erdmans, 2000. Giza Vermeers, The Jesus Notice of Josephus Re-Examined, Journal of Jewish Studies, Spring, 1987. Alice Whately, The Testimonium Flavianum Controversy from Antiquity to the Present. Edwin M. Yamuchi, Jesus Outside the New Testament, Jesus Under Fire. Editors Michael J. Wilkin and J.P. Moreland, Tondra, 1996. The article that we're looking at is by Christopher Price, 2004, revised in 2009. So that's Did Josephus refer to Jesus? A thorough review of the Testimonium Flavianum, Christopher Price, and we just read out his bibliography. This is an excellent article. I've read quite a few articles on the topic. This gives a very good synopsis of the basic arguments on the issue. But before we plunge into Christopher Price's article, and so I would encourage you to type in to Google, Did Josephus refer to Jesus? A thorough review of the Testimonium Flavianum, Christopher Price. Go and have a read of the article, and it'll give you a good introduction to the scholarship and debate on the topic. Yeah, so what I want to do here is, in his book, The Resurrection of Jesus, A New Historical Approach, Michael R. Lacona writes this about John Mayer, a scholar in this Josephus scholarship. And he writes this about what John Mayer says. John Mayer provides 5 reasons for holding that the present text is authentic in entirety. First, it appears in all of the Greek manuscripts of the Antiquities of the Jews, without any notable variation. Second, the text provides a passing and Blair's reference to James, who is here of little consequence since Josephus is more interested in the illegal behavior of Annas, and Jesus is even less of a subject, only inserted to identify James. Thus it fits well in the context of Annas' removal from the office of high priest. Third, no New Testament of early Christian writers wrote of James in a matter-of-fact way as the brother of Jesus, but rather with the reference we would expect, the brother of the Lord, or the brother of the Saviour. The words, the one called Christ, are neutral and appear to be employed to distinguish Jesus from others in his writings by the same name. Fourth, Josephus' account of James' executions differ significantly in the time and manner that offered by the 2nd century Christian author Josephus and in the 3rd century Clement of Alexandria. If Josephus' account was invented by a Christian, we would expect it to be better reflect the Christian accounts. Fifth, Josephus' account is short, a matter of fact compared to the Christian accounts by Josephus and Clement of Alexandria. Herschel Shanks and Ben Witherington add what we may regard as a 6th reason for authenticity. Contrary to what might be expected, the text has no hints of anti-Semitism. The Jews seem, in fact, to have liked James. Neither is the text positive about Christianity or Jesus. In short, this text gives no indication of tampering by Christians, and the large majority of scholars regard the entire passage as authentic words of Jesus. The other occasion where Josephus mentions Jesus is the Antiquities of the Jews, commonly referred to as the Testimonium Flavianum. The literature on this subject is enormous. Leading Josephus scholars Louis Fieldman lists 87 discussions on the authenticity of this passage between 1937 and 98. Scholars hold 3 general positions on this passage. Number 1, the entire text is authentic. Number 2, the entire text is an interpolation. And 3, Josephus mentions Jesus in the text, but it was subsequently doctored by a Christian interpolator. So here, what we've read from page 236 to 238 is basically Lacona saying that the first mention of Jesus by Josephus is generally accepted as thoroughly authentic. But just putting this book away, sorry. So the first mention of Jesus, which we're going to read now, is authentic. In Book 20 on Jewish Antiquities, we read this: but the younger Annas, who, as we said, received the high priesthood, was a bold disposition, exceptionally daring. He followed the party of the Sadducees, who were severe in judgment above all the Jews, as we've already known. And therefore Annas was of such a disposition, he thought he had no good opportunity, as Festus was now dead, and Albinus was still on the road. So he assembled a council of judges and brought before it the brother of Jesus, the so-called Christ, whose name was James, together with others, and having accused them as lawbreakers, he delivered over to be stoned. So we looked at Mayer, who gave arguments for that passage, saying that it was authentic and that most scholars think. But the disputed passage that a lot of scholars dispute, and there's a lot of debate, is this passage in Jewish Antiquities 18.33. It says, quote, "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ, and when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again on the third day, as the divine prophets have foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him, and the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct at this day. So that's the passage that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be discussing whether it's authentic or not. Sorry about this, the phone's ringing. Sorry about this. Oh, I'll just be a second. Come in. I'll just put. Sorry about this. Come in. I'm coming. I'm doing a video. I know I'm doing a video. Sorry about that, folks. We can recommence. There's a phone call I had to go and answer. So apologise for that interruption. So where did I? Yeah, I read about the interpolation. So we notice that there are three basic views about this text. Number one, that this text wasn't a complete interpolation. Number two, that the text is partial interpolation. And number three, that it's full Josephus. Now, the reason why this is so important is if this is fully or even in part true Josephus, it kind of backs up a lot of what the New Testament is talking about and gives credence to the historical veracity of the New Testament. And so that's why it's such a hotly contested passage in historical inquiry. And so we need to give some account of the various scholarship concerning this passage. Mainstream scholars quote from this article by Price, and not Robert Price, but Christopher Price. Mainstream scholars, quote, he says, notably the consensus for partial authenticity is held by scholars from diverse perspectives. This is important. Liberal commentators such as Robert Funk, J. Dominic Crossan, and A. N. Wilson accept a substantial part of the TF, or Testimonium Flavianum, as originally Josephus. So do Jewish scholars such as Geezer Vermeers, Louis H. Feldman, and Paul Winter, and secular scholars such as E.P. Sanders and Paul Fredrickson. Even Jeff Fowler, a co-founder of the Secular Web, recognizes the merits of the partial authenticity theory. Paula Fredrickson sums up the state of question among scholars. Most scholars currently inclined to see the passage as basically authentic, with a few later insertions by Christian scribe. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, page 249. Meyer writes, at this time, there appeared Jesus a wise man. This is the edited version that scholars would say is partially authentic. At this time, there appeared Jesus was a wise man, for he was a doer of startling deeds, a teacher of people who received the truth with pleasure, and he gained a following among many Jews and among many Gentile origin. And when Pilate, because of an accusation made by the leading men among us, condemned him to the cross, those who had loved him previously did not cease to do so. And up until this very day, the tribe of Christians named after him and had not died out. So these are some of the basic arguments for the partial authenticity of Josephus. As for myself, I think the whole of this testimonium is authentic Josephus, and the reason being is a couple of lines of evidence. Number one, from my perspective, the manuscript evidence. The manuscript evidence overwhelmingly shows there is a tradition across the board that seems to imply this rendering of Josephus. The whole thing, the whole caboodle of what he says about Jesus. For example, Origen. Why did Origen make the point that Josephus was not a Christian? That implies the tradition of the testimonium that we have was around even before Origen. Second, the manuscript evidence. The most of the manuscripts, the vast majority, favor this reading. Now, it might be argued that the Latin translations are 10th, 12th century AD, but it's also backed up by quotations from, for example, like Jerome. Even though there might be slight differences, it seems to me that there is strong evidence for the full-blown authenticity of what Josephus says about Jesus. But we're going to just look at the arguments for an authentic core of Jesus' language and style. James H. Charlesworth, Jesus with Judaism, page 93-94, says, we can be confident that there was a minimal reference to Jesus because once the Christian sections are removed, the rest makes good grammatical and historical sense. The peculiar Christian words are parenthetically connected to the narrative, hence they are grammatically free and could easily have been inserted by a Christian. These sections also are disruptive, and when they are removed, the flow of thought is improved and smoother. Graham Stanton says, quote, once the obviously Christian additions are removed, the remaining comments are consistent with Josephus' vocabulary and style, Stanton, the Gospels, and Jesus. Key words. Now, that was about this time Jesus. Stephen Manson says the opening phrase about this time is characteristic of the language in antiquities. The words, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, Mason adds, as it stands, the reticence to call Jesus a man seems like a rejoinder to the previous already flattering statement that he was a wise man. It seems more like a qualification of existing statement than of a free creation. Mason also says he uses the designation a wise man sparingly, but as a term of considerable praise. King Solomon was such a wise man, and so was Daniel. Interestingly, both men had what we call occult powers, abilities to perform cures and interpret dreams, etc., of the sort that Jesus is credited with in the Testimonium. So this kind of language that is in this Testimonium seems to be Josephus kind of language. The Jewish scholar Giza Vermees writes this: of these, Solomon and Daniel are the most obvious parables to Jesus qua wise man. Both were celebrated as master wisdom. Hence, it is not surprising to find either teacher follows closely the phrase under the consideration of the Testimonium. That's Giza Vermees, Jesus, the Notice of Josephus Re-examined, Journal of Jewish Studies, spring 1987, page 3. Another statement in the Testimonium, for he was a doer of wonderful works. The word doer, says Professor Meyer, says this: it is used elsewhere in Josephus only in the sense of a poet, but Josephus has a fondness for resolving a simple verb into two verbs, a noun expressing the agent and the auxiliary verb, kreit einai for the simple krinein. Moreover, Josephus uses such cognates as poietios, that which is to be done, poiesis, doing, causing, as well as poetry, poem, and poetikos, that which caused something. Page 81, Meyer. Further, it is not all that unusual for ancient Greek authors to use occasional word in an unusual way. The undisputed epistles of Paul have their share not only of hapex legomenia, but also of Pauline words and phrases that Paul uses in a given passage with an unusual meaning and construction, especially since Josephus is dealing in the Testimonium with peculiar material drawn perhaps from a special source. We need to be surprised if this usual differs slightly at a few points. So again, we're looking at key words, and the evidence is mounting that these key words in Josephus, most of them are authentic Josephus when they talk about Jesus. Josephus says, a teacher of such men has received the truth with pleasure. Though Thackeray says, in particular, Thackeray, the prince of Josephian scholars, who went so far, quote, in his study of Josephus language as to compose a lexicon to Josephus for his own use, so as to see how precisely each word is used in Josephus and whether there is evidence for shifts of style in various parts of his works due to his assistance or to other reasons, noted that the phrases such as people accept the truth gladly is characteristic of the scribe in this part of the Antiquities, since the phrase appears 8 times in the book 1719, supposedly the work of Thucydian assistant, and nowhere else in Josephus. That's referencing Louise H. Feldman, The Testimonium Flavianum, The State of Question, Christological Perspectives, editor Robert F. Berkeley, and Sir Edwards, page 188. Now, the rejoinders here, just to come in, Earl Doughty, a scholar who's not really a scholar, he's only got a BA, but he seems to, because he's a Jesus mythicist, and seems to attack modern scholarship, he's been given a voice, which in my estimation, he doesn't deserve that voice. But he has said that the Testimonium is fake, and some of the arguments are that it doesn't carry the context. If you read the Testimonium in the context of the rest of the book of Josephus, it doesn't fit. Actually, it does. If you read Josephus and you read the chapters prior to the Testimonium and the chapters after, you'll find that it fits. It fits perfectly in the sense that you get Josephus talking about these messiahs, talking about Pontius Pilate, and these two themes are brought into this Testimonium just off the cuff. Excellently Josephus, and so you can't really go with Earl Doughty there. The other thing about Earl Doughty is, just trying to think of the other argument that he makes. Earl Doughty says that Jesus is not mentioned in any other books of Josephus, and therefore, how can it be authentic Josephus? The answer to that is history is often patchy. You're never going to get a full resume of evidences everywhere in history. History and historical construction is only partial. We only have partial evidences. And so he's putting an unfair burden on the historian to prove the point that just because it's not mentioned in other parts of Josephus, then it's not authentic Josephus. So those are two critical arguments that someone like Earl Doughty, who's not even a great scholar, he's just got a BA, yet a lot of the atheists lionize this guy, and secular scholars and theologians seem to have to deal with this guy because so many skeptics are influenced by this Earl Doughty. For example, Richard Carrier is influenced by him, an atheist scholar. And I feel that scholars should just ignore Earl Doughty. His arguments are a waste of time, and why people take him seriously is beyond me. If we go on to, he drew over to him both many Jews and many of the Gentiles. Mayer says this: in the whole of John's Gospel, no one clearly designates a Gentile ever interacts directly with Jesus. The very fact that Gentiles seek to speak to Jesus is a sign to him that the hour of his passion, which alone makes a universal mission possible, is at hand. John 12:20-26. In Matthew's Gospel, where a few exceptions to the rule are allowed, we find a pointedly programmatic saying in Jesus' mission. Charge to the 12, go not to the Gentiles and do not enter a Samaritan city, rather go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Matthew 10:5-6. The few Gentiles who do come into contact with Jesus are not objects of Jesus' missionary outreach. They rather come to him unbidden, humble, realizing they are out of place. For Matthew, they point forward to the universal mission, which begins only after Jesus' death and resurrection. While Mark and Luke are not as explicit as Matthew on this point, they basically follow the same pattern during his public ministry. Jesus does not undertake any formal mission to the Gentiles. The few who come to him do so by way of exception. Hence, the implications of the Testimonium, says Mayer, that Jesus equally won a large following among both Jews and Gentiles simply contradicts the clear statements about the Gospels. Unless we want to fantasize about a Christian interpolator who is intent on inserting a summary of Jesus' ministry into Josephus, and who nevertheless wishes to contradict what the Gospel says about Jesus' ministry, the obvious conclusion to draw is that the core of the Testimonium comes from a non-Christian hand, namely Josephus. Understandably, Josephus simply retrojected the situation of his own day into the time of Jesus. Naive retrojection is a common trait of Greco-Roman historians. Mayer, page 6465. So when we're not going to go into all of the evidence, but having reviewed a lot of the evidence, the article says, having reviewed each phrase in the testimonium, so you can go and read the article, we are now in a position to evaluate the evidence. The following phrases are characteristic of Joseph. At this time there appeared a wise man, startling deeds, received the truth with pleasure, leading men among us, those who have loved him, and the tribe of. The following phrases are Christian glosses. It is lawful to call him a man, and he was the Christ. However, the later phrase was likely he was thought to be the Christ, or some rough equivalent. I just want to point out here that the scholars and individuals will say that there's been interpolation. And the fact that they mention this interpolation gives the impression that there is a large quantity of this passage that is just completely doctored and not really valuable. And I think that's a misrepresentation of the word interpolation on this context of Josephus. When we mean interpolation, we're talking about a word, or one or two words, but the general thrust of what Josephus is saying is basically authentic. So we must get the right balance when we use the word interpolation. I think that you can go and read the article for yourself, and if you're interested, excuse me, it's a very good article. And if you want to have a look at the resurrection of Jesus, there is also a nice little snippet on Josephus by Mike Lacona in the IVP book. There's also an article which I'll link to. On tectonic apologetics, there is articles here. There is an article on Josephus. So if you go onto tectonic apologetics, you'll find an article by James Patrick Holding on Josephus, which is a very helpful resume of the scholarship. Also, there's also an article by Standpoint. I've done videos on Josephus before, and in Public Christianity website, there is videos by scholars on Josephus. But if you go to Standpoint magazine, www.standpoint.co.uk, Jesus in the Eyes of Josephus, Giza Vermeers, February 2010, January, February 2010, there you get a pretty good scholarly article by probably one of the greatest thinkers on the Dead Sea Scrolls, who's dead now. And that's a good academic article. So basically, did Josephus refer to Jesus? Absolutely, 100%. He mentioned Jesus twice, one in connection with the Lord's brother, James, and secondly, in connection to being a miracle worker, to have been crucified on a cross, to be a miracle worker, and to reported have been resurrected. And I think these can be established very strongly if you look at the critical scholarship. So this is just a little introduction to the scholarship. So enjoy. One thing is for sure, the scholars of the critical side are, in terms of the atheist and skeptical side, the scholarship by them is virtually, can only be described as pathetic, really. There's no real critical, solid engagement with Josephus scholarship from the skeptical camp on YouTube or really in the academic world, to be honest. Anyhow, I'll leave you with that. You can work it through, think about it, and I hope it's a blessing to you. Thank you for listening, and God bless.